Dolly Curtis, and today I'm in Danbury at the Palace Theater, at the historic Palace Theater. And with me is Mayor Eriquez, who is the mayor of Danbury, and he's going to shed some light on the potential of this wonderful historic theater and what might happen to it.
Thank you, Dolly, and thank you for this opportunity. Our vision for this theater, obviously, is a key component of our downtown life, and in fact of our greater community's life, is to restore it, to be able to renovate this facility and to make it a live center for the performing arts, to be able to accommodate opportunities for dance, for music, and certainly for theater and perhaps for film in the one film setting as this theater functioned years ago. The opportunities that exist for people of all ages, certainly for children, to be able to fold into the curriculum within our schools, opportunities for our young people here from within the city of Danbury and potentially from the greater Danbury community, to make this an active and very functional place many days during each week throughout the year here within the heart of our city.
I mean, your city has so much potential. I understand that the railroad station is right now being restored. This would just be another wonderful thing to restore.
Well, absolutely. Our intent is to work with the current owners to try to wrest control of the Palace Theater through the formation of a separate nonprofit entity so that, in fact, that tax credits or deductions would be available to people, to individuals, to businesses, to corporations that we will be soliciting to support, in fact, pledge dollars to support the renovation effort here once we, in fact, have been able to come to terms for the control of the theater. But there's a great opportunity here to be able to preserve a great part of the city of Danbury's past, to be able to retain this important part of our heritage, and to put it to a new functional use, basically to a reuse of that which it had facilitated in the past here within our community. But there's a great opportunity to do so many things as our city's grown in its appreciation for the arts. Many arts organizations, cultural organizations can now have an adequate, wonderful, historic theater in which to be able to provide opportunities for the general public. We need to understand that this effort and obviously celebrating the arts, developing the arts and culture gives us an opportunity to increase economic development opportunities within our city.
I'm sure there's a spillover effect that would affect the whole downtown.
A major derivative benefit to the greater downtown area and in fact throughout the city. We can attract people here as a result of concerts that are held, dance companies that would come in, theater opportunities that could take place here that will come from throughout the greater Danbury region and perhaps beyond.
The location is wonderful, right across from the library,
Absolutely.
Right near the highways.
And the Danbury Public Library is our key cultural center. It's a traditional library and functions effectively as that, but it's a community information center, but it's also very much a part of the cultural life here within the city of Danbury through the many programs it offers. So to be able to have these two wonderful facilities as neighbors across the street from one another, to be able to have a parking lot adjacent to the rear, actually, of this Palace Theater, this historic theater, that can accommodate as many as 400 cars by the city's plans to improve the alleyway between next door to this theater, which we will call and is known as Palace Walk, landscaping it, making it more secure, lighting it, just making it a more attractive place for people to be able to access the rear parking lot is going to make it a very functional theater that will attract people from throughout the greater Danbury community.
Well, my cameraman, Victor Cromwell, and I decided to come today and take a good look at what's here and try and bring an awareness to the rest of Fairfield County so they can see what you have here and what could possibly be in the future. So we're with you on this all the way.
Well, thank you, Dolly, and I appreciate your being here and highlighting that which we're doing, what our vision is for this historic theater here in the city of Danbury. It's one shared by many of our residents, by our businesses. I can tell you they've been desirous, I've been desirous as a Danbury native to see this theater function once again as a true theater as it had. Many years ago, there have been performances here by Louis Armstrong, Liberace, obviously vaudeville in the early days, and certainly this place has evolved through the years. I think there's a wonderful opportunity for our community through the various arts organizations that exist, perhaps organizations from throughout greater Danbury. And as I stated, perhaps working collaboratively with Western Connecticut State University and our schools, our local schools, for the benefit of our children. There's so many opportunities that we can see, that we envision occurring here effectively obviously needing to have those special events, those concerts to be able to generate the revenue to support the other activities of some of the arts organizations that may not have the deep pockets, if you will. But to allow our community to grow in appreciation of the arts and culture, and to really restore this important part of our past, this historic theater, this beautiful theater, for that purpose will really, really serve, I think, our community for many, many years to come very well.
Well, wonderful. We're here to learn more, so let's see what we can learn today
Great.
and share with everyone.
I hope you enjoy it.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
It's a great pleasure to meet you, Barry Goodkin, the member and former president, you told me, of the Theater Historical Society.
Yes. Well, it's nice to meet you, Dolly.
It is a pleasure
and
to
it's
find
nice to
someone.
be in this beautiful Danbury Palace Theater. The theater, as you're probably aware, was opened in September 6, 1928. It was designed by the architect Edward T. Wiley of Hartford. And it's designed in the Adams style, which was quite popular a little earlier in the theater development series. The Adams style consists mainly of the festooning, the plaster bas relief that you can see
It's
down.
wonderful.
And the marble arches. Actually, this is not marble. This is a process called scagliola, which is a combination of plaster and marble dust. And it was much cheaper to form than marble, and it was used extensively in the movie palaces that were built in 1929.
So it's a faux marble, it's a pretend?
That's right, it is a faux
Held
marble.
up.
And it's in one of the theaters that I was in, they found that it was more expensive to find the artisans to reproduce this than to now use genuine marble.
Wow.
But this is, the plaster here is in remarkably good shape for a
Okay.
theater of its age. And of course, with the brass fixtures, it's just a gorgeous theater. The Adams
columns.
styles with the cornices at the top of the arches was, as I say, was more prominent in the theaters that were designed in the mid-20s. It may be that the design of this theater was an earlier design, but not executed until 1928.
So is it similar to the other theaters that are flourishing today that have been restored, like the Palace and Stanford? Is this similar, or is this a little different style?
Well,
What about-
there are similarities. The Stanford Palace has Adams and Empire work, a little more gold than I've seen in this theater. But in the Bridgeport theaters, this open area looking down into either the audience or in this case into the inner lobby is quite similar to the Thomas Lamb designs that were used in both of the Bridgeport theaters, the Palace and the Majestic, and the Loews Poli in New Haven, as well as the Capitol Theater in Hartford, which became the Loews Poli.
You know, I'm just sort of blown away by all this information you have. Have you studied all the theaters in the New England, or is it the whole country?
I've studied all of the theaters that operated up till 1950 in Connecticut, and many of the theaters designed by the same architect. The prominent architects of the day were Thomas Lamb, the Rapp and Rapp firm out of Chicago, and C. Howard Crane, who designed many theaters in the Detroit area.
So am I allowed to ask you what brought you to do that? I mean, what was the inspiration to get you?
Well, my father and uncle had both been in the theater business, and I started when I got out of high school in the Philadelphia theaters and worked in several of the downtown Philadelphia theaters, one of which was the last theater that had stage shows. And there is just such a thrill when a live orchestra strikes up an overture in a theater that when I came up here, I had been out of theater business for a number of years, and we started to go into New York, and that thrill came back of the overture playing. And I saw these theaters here, and many of the theaters were operated by Warner Brothers at one time. And Philadelphia was a heavy concentration of Warner Brothers theaters, and I was wondering how Warner Brothers became so prominent here in Connecticut. And at one time, Warner Brothers, who was a major film producer at the time, operated about 20 theaters in the state of Connecticut, and all 3 of the theaters here in Danbury were operated by the Warner Brothers chain. The Empress next door, which preceded this theater, and the Capitol down the street, which was built in 1923 and demolished in 1950.
Wow, I didn't even realize there were 2 other theaters. You mean this is the existing of the 3 theaters then?
This is the only theater remaining. However, if you walk back into the alley in the parking lot, you can see the original stage house of the Empress Theater.
Wow. What do you know about the interior of this theater?
Well, this interior is very similar to other designs by the Thomas Lamb organization, and again, it's not heavily on gold work, on gold leaf. However, that may very well be because after RKO took over the Stanley Warner Theater chain, they came in and they painted many of these theaters. They were not the greatest maintainers, and they painted much of the plaster work in what they called RKO blue, which was kind of a semi-phosphorescent royal blue, and they may very well have painted much of the auditorium side walls and the organ
Well,
grills.
can you tell me a little bit about the chandelier that's in front of us? You said something about there's a big lighting fixture inside in the upper ceiling.
The grand chandelier, which hangs from the auditorium from the Great Dome, and that's another common thing of many of the theaters that were built in the 20s, is that they have a very large circular or oval dome in the ceiling, and the grand chandelier there, instead of being mostly crystal, which is in many of the theaters, the Stanford Palace has a crystal chandelier, it's mostly brass, and this chandelier complements the chandelier in
What is this called right here, this outer lobby then?
This is the
Balcony lobby?
what they call the mezzanine promenade.
Okay.
And
Promenade.
the promenades were very common. Also, if you go up to the top of the theater, as I recall, there's also what they call a crossover, which is a hallway area that takes you from one side of the theater to the other for the upper balcony seats.
Oh, there's another balcony above me here?
Well, there's one balcony, the first 6 rows are called the loge area, and separated by a walkway and and brass rails. There's a lot of brass in this theater.
In this theater. What about the work on the side walls where the organ used to be, or what happened to all of that? Do you know anything about?
No, it's probably one of the most important things to maintaining these theaters is to have a roof that doesn't leak.
Okay,
Because
basic.
if the water, well, it's a little more than that, because if the water gets into the side walls, most of the plaster has been set on burlap. And they just take and they install the burlap on the side walls, and then they plaster over it. And if you get any water leakage in there at all, it stays. It doesn't dry out, and consequently it comes through and has that flaking effect.
Burlap is organic. It's plant material made from hemp, made from plants. So that would become molded.
It would become molded, and what you find in some of the old theaters that haven't been maintained is eventually the plaster just starts to hang and drops
right
into
off.
Yes.
But there's some very fancy plaster detailing inside the house itself, and can you shed any light on that? Was there an organ in there? Was there?
Yes, the theater, when it opened, had a Marr and Colton organ. It was 3 manual, which means 3 different keyboards, and that allowed the organist to set the various stops and the orchestral effects on the individual keyboards.
But it's not here now?
No, it was removed in the 60s. The organ chambers, which flank each side of the auditorium, as I understand it, were used to install air conditioning equipment. But the organ was moved out. They didn't have the console, the keyboard for the organ. And it was moved out and acquired by the Connecticut Valley Theater Organ Society.
Okay, so what I'm looking at is what remains of this beautiful theater that's been used as a movie house recently.
Yes.
But still has some beautiful detailing in that front lobby, that ceiling that looks like
Yes.
it's all plaster with
Yes, that's the original Adams design, and the wood paneling on the walls for the tunnel that comes through the apartment building that fronts on Main Street.
There's an apartment building that's connected to this complex?
It's more like the theater is connected to the apartment building.
Really?
The apartment building was
And
built
you-
first, and then they used one of the storefronts to tunnel through, and there's a connecting tunnel. This is the connecting tunnel down here that brings the patrons in off of the street into the main lobby.
So
main
the
inner lobby.
apartment building is all in front of me,
Yes.
and now I'm behind it.
Yeah, actually, there's two apartment towers. I don't know how many apartments are in each one, but they're two separate
Do you know
buildings.
anything about the beautiful windows that are downstairs where the ticket booths are that remain? It looks like there's some beautiful stained glass or some windows.
Well, they used decorative glass in many of these 1920 theaters, 1920 circuit theaters, and that's not very often the Tiffany studios were used to produce that glass. I don't know if that was the case. That's not the most decorative that I've seen. But in many of these theaters, you'll notice that the signage inside that says manager, ladies' rooms,
Right.
or in brass frames, and very often they use stained glass in there as well, but this is not quite that elaborate.
At the time that this was all in its high gear, was this for live theater, live entertainment?
The theater, when it was
20s,
open,
30s?
was what they called a combination theater. Combination being that it was equipped to show both films and to have live acts or vaudeville acts. And when it opened, it had a silent film and a 5-act vaudeville bill. They were playing split weeks. And when it opened on a Thursday night, their vaudeville acts played Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Then they had a straight movie on Sunday, which was usually because of the blue laws in the state would not allow live performances. And then they'd go to a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday performance, and then open again on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday.
And you're talking about late 20s, 30s?
1928, the theater opened, and it apparently was developed by a group of downtown businessmen, and very often the businessmen didn't operate the theater. They would have an operating company do the operation of the theater for them. My research indicates that they only had 1 year of vaudeville. In October of 1927, the Warner Brothers opened the first part talking picture, The Jazz Singer, on Broadway. And they were quite successful with it. But there was a great reluctance on the movie industry to move from silent films into talking films.
Yeah.
So the Warner Brothers, about the only way that they could get the theaters installed with the sound equipment was to buy theaters. And in 1928, they acquired the Stanley Company of America, which was about 300 theaters operating in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, and Washington, D.C. In September of 1929, they acquired two companies here in Connecticut, the Gottsman Circuit and the Hoffman Brothers Amusement Company. And right before they acquired the company, Hoffman Brothers acquired the leases on this theater and on the Empress Theater. And since Warner Brothers was primarily interested in movies, they had little interest in vaudeville, and the vaudeville shows were not continued after 1929, although from time to time I understand there were live performances in the theater.
Do you know anything about, though, the backstage area to this theater, or what, in as much as it wasn't used as a live theater, then the green room, the dressing rooms, the bowels of the theater, the bottom, the orchestra pit?
Well, the thing that attracted me to this theater in the first place is it has such a large stage house. Most theaters are really three separate buildings: the outer lobby area, the auditorium, and the stage. And the stage is usually higher. What they call the stage house is usually considerably higher than the building that houses the auditorium. This is such a mammoth stage house on this theater that I just couldn't get over it and wait to get in. And it has dressing rooms on each side of the stage. And as I understand it, there's a total of 20 dressing rooms, which for a theater that was playing 5 acts of vaudeville is just remarkable.
But
for
only
its time.
1 year, you're saying, then it went into a
1
movie.
year.
What a shame.
When it opened, it had a 9-piece orchestra plus an organist that played between the orchestra turns.
Do you recall, have an idea of what the cost was originally in that period to have built something like this?
I don't have that information
Extravagance?
now, but we certainly can find it for you.
Can find it. I
Yes.
wanted to ask you how many people could be seated here, or how the capacity.
The published figures were 2,000, 1,200 in the orchestra and 800 in the loges and the balcony.
And you were telling me earlier that some of the really good characteristics that makes this a potential theater that could be so highly utilized is the fact that it's located downtown.
It's located downtown. It has adequate parking facilities, behind the theater and close by the theater. It has a large stage and with a seating capacity of 2,000, and it has enough seats to make it profitable for many operations.
Well, I mean, you also mentioned there's many difficulties financially in making these things happen because traveling theater performances have to have demand a certain number of seated capacity in order to cover the cost of the whole...
Depending on the type of shows that are going to be done here and or in any theater would dictate the cost of operating, the kind of staffing. But in all cases, you need the support of the community, either directly or indirectly through volunteer work, either before the theater's operating or after the theater begins to operate.
Well, the whole reason we're here today is to try to make that awareness to the community of Danbury and Ridgefield and Wilton and Norwalk and Stamford, and because the show airs in many places, that there is this potential here in downtown Danbury, and it could be a wonderful thing. And you are remarkable. I am just so impressed with everything you've told me, so I hope at some point you and I can continue some of these discussions further.
Well, I certainly hope so.
I am very impressed. Can you take me, though, and show me some of these places here?
Sure, be happy to.
Great, thanks.
Now, Dolly, we're standing in the balcony crossover aisle, which separates the loge from the upper balcony seats. The upper balcony is above these brass rails, and the first 6 rows of the balcony, which are referred to as the loge, the most desirable seats in the theater, 6 rows of seats. These were the only reserved seats when the theater opened. The opening bill consisted of a silent film, a 5-act vaudeville bill, a 9-piece orchestra, and a large organ, and the cost of the loge seats was 75 cents for the vaudeville shows, 60 cents for the orchestra seats, and 45 cents for the balcony. On Sundays, they only played films, and the loge seats dropped to 50 cents, and the orchestra seats at 60 cents. If you're looking over, the theater was what they call triplexed in 1978. That is, that they carved the auditorium into 3 different screening rooms. The balcony portion is the largest area, and it has 800 seats, and the orchestra has been divided into 2 screening rooms.
Below us, you mean?
Below us, correct. And the screening room on the left side of the auditorium is slightly smaller than on the right side. Usually the practice was when they would open with a big picture in later years after the theater was triplexed, the big picture would start here in the large theater, then it would move to the smaller theater, and then to the smallest theater if it stayed for more than several weeks. This, again, is a beautifully designed theater, very well decorated. Again, if you see the main dome and the main chandelier, the grand chandelier, you can see the gold and the festoon design.
Now that the chandelier is brass. It looks like it's brass
It's
with
brass and opaque glass, yes.
Beautiful. Now it's coming down, though, about 1.5 feet. It's not totally connected.
Well, these chandeliers are on cables, and there's a winch above the grand dome where they can winch the chandelier down to the floor level to clean the glass and to replace the light bulbs.
I understand that. It only moves about 40 turns, so moves it about 1 inch or something. So
usually on these hand winches, it takes from 30 minutes to an hour for the to winch it all the way down to the floor, and even longer to bring it up because, of course, you have that much weight on it. The interesting thing is in these chandeliers, in this particular house, it's a 3-circuit electrical orientation so that they have 3 different colors of bulbs, and by changing the intensity of the light on each circuit, they can create all kinds of intricate colors and light patterns.
So that's how they were doing the lighting for the stage? It wasn't done from a light box, or was that just for effect?
Well,
atmosphere?
No, the main switchboard, which is still in place, would control the lighting, and that could be pre-programmed in those days so that they could set it to come on blue and then turn to scarlet and then come back and
so then it is
color.
More than just a decorative chandelier?
Oh yeah, it's very functional, and in the original operating days that would have provided most of the light for the theater during intermission between shows. because in those days there was not as much light being thrown off the screen, and it was more difficult to find your seats. That's why it was absolutely necessary to have ushers in those days, whereas in the later day
Right, we don't have them.
cineplexes, they don't have ushers, because for the most part, people come in at the beginning of the show and don't have to be seated once the film starts.
Now, what about this beautiful ceiling? Is that embossed, or what is all that decorative work there?
That's all plaster molded, and what they do is the craftsmen, many of them came over from the European countries, and they would, for the most part, these designs, the deeper designs, there's some cameos over behind the curtain which are not easily seen, but they would be cast down on the ground and subsequently plastered up on the ceiling. These other designs would either be pre-molded and stuck on the ceiling, or they would use molds and jigs to put them up into the ceiling, and then they would come in and paint. Now, the gold that you see, for the most part, they did not use gold in those days because gold was very expensive, and what they would do is take aluminum leaf and use aluminum and then coat it with orange shellac, which would give it a gold color, and then in turn would coat that with another protective coating. So it appears that this has not been altered in all the years that the theater's been in operation, and you can see how remarkable it is. Now, if in restoration, probably what would happen is that there would be more cleaning effort than anything else.
I think it's in wonderful condition,
It
actually.
is, and when these theaters opened, most of them were heated by coal, and the coal dust really accumulated on all of this ornate plaster.
I bet.
And
Going
for the
up.
most part, what it requires is a major cleaning, but you have to put the scaffolding up. And where you see there's plaster damage on the organ grill on auditorium right, they have to determine where that water leak came from, make sure it's been sealed, and then go in and chip off all the deteriorated plaster and replace it
Looks
with
like
new
a
plaster.
big job. Also, very ornate work there on those columns.
Well, the ornate work, what they'll do is that there are fewer craftsmen that can handle this work, but what they'll do is they'll take molds of the good plaster side. For example, the organ grill on auditorium left side is in
yes.
better shape, so they would probably make their molds from there and then cast their plaster and then bring it over and put it on on auditorium right.
So it's just thrilling and exciting and so much more than I ever anticipated, and to have someone like you, Barry Goodkin, to tell me the history and to share with everybody the history to this beautiful theater of the past. I'll keep my eye on it and hope people come together and try and make this another thing that can add to downtown Danbury and make it a nicer place for everybody.
Thank you, Dolly.
Thanks for taking our time and your time this afternoon together.
My pleasure.